press conference. We're going to have time for Q&A. If you'll please raise your hand and I'll call on you. That's how we'd like us to a little more order.
Do we have the ETA?
Yeah, we're about to start. All right. How y'all doing? Is everybody live and ready to go? Everybody good? All right. Thank you all for being here. Just as you all know, I called you here to announce the findings of our internal affairs investigation into the shooting that happened at Austin East High School on August 12th, 2021. So first things first, we have Mayor Indya Kincannon, who will then be followed by Chief Paul Noel, and then we'll have time for some Q&A. Again, as a reminder, when we get to the Q&A section, if you'll please raise your hand, and I'll call on you individually for those questions and answer. So at this time, I'll bring Mayor Indya Kincannon up.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. We are here to announce the findings of the internal investigation into the shooting at Austin East Magnet High School on April 12th, 2021. This was a tragic day for the Thompson family, the Austin East community, the officers involved, and truly for our entire city. Like many of you, we've been anxious to wrap up this investigation. Once the TBI completed its probe into all the matters surrounding this case, we were able to proceed with our internal investigation, and I want to thank Chief Noel for expediting this. While District Attorney Sharm Allen determined there were no criminal charges to be filed against the officers in this case, our investigation was looking for any violations of internal policies and procedures. I want to turn things over to Chief Noel to break down the IAU report and to detail a new review process we will be putting into place at KPD. Chief Noel.
Thank you, Mayor Kincannon, and thank all of you for being here today. I know this incident has deservedly generated a lot of attention, and there are still several lingering questions which we will address today. Also recognize that it took a significant amount of time for our internal review to be completed. Some of that was outside of our control. However, there are things we could do to speed up the pace of these investigations without compromising the quality of the investigations. Including some of the things that we have done to speed up this process is adding an additional investigator to internal affairs and also putting the Internal Affairs Unit under the direct supervision of Assistant Chief Mark Fortner. I want to start by saying that the findings of our internal investigation in no way diminish how deeply saddened we are as a department about what happened on April 12th, 2021. That day was a tragedy for so many people in so many ways. Most importantly, our thoughts remain with the family of Anthony Thompson Jr. and the Austin East community. We know that this incident damaged relationships between our department and between the community. Rest assured, I am committed, and the Knoxville Police Department is committed to putting the work in to repair those relationships. Now I want to tell you about the findings of our case. The purpose of the internal investigation was to determine if the use of force was within policy or if there were any other policy violations surrounding this incident. Our investigation found that Officer Jonathan Clabo, who deployed deadly force, did act within policy. Our investigation also found that Lieutenant Stan Cash acted within policy in terms of his supervisory responsibilities following the use of deadly force. Officer Adam Wilson and Officer Brian Baldwin were not found in violation of any policy directly related to the use of force. Officer Adam Wilson was found in violation of our body-worn camera policy for failing to activate his body-worn camera prior to the incident. He did receive a reprimand for that violation. Based upon my review of this case and my 25 years in law enforcement, the use of force and actions of our officers were justified and they were in policy of the Knoxville Police Department. Our officers were put in an incredibly difficult and unpredictable situation, and they never could have anticipated it would end the way it did. I and the members of the Knoxville Police Department are going to continue to support these four officers however we can. I am also hopeful that the members of our community will continue to support them as well. This in no way diminishes how tragic that day was for everyone involved. The lives of the Thompson family, the Austin East community, and our officers were forever changed that day. With that, I know there are still questions about how this incident was handled. One question that has been asked of us is why were crisis negotiators not utilized? There are several reasons why crisis negotiators would not have been used in that situation. One reason was there was no prior contact with Anthony Thompson Jr., and our officers were not even certain that he was in the bathroom prior to going in that bathroom and looking for him. Two, officers had no reason to believe that he was armed inside of the school, and they had no reason to believe that Anthony was aware that the officers were looking for him at the time. Based on these circumstances, it did not meet the criteria for involving crisis negotiators. Officers were simply trying to locate Anthony for the incident that happened earlier in the day. We have also seen questions about what was perceived as a delay to render aid after the shooting happened. Internal Affairs took a close look at that as well. While the answer is more complicated, I hope that you understand how we reached the conclusion that we did. In the event that deadly force is used, our policy requires that officers immediately take all measures to render the situation safe and provide or summon medical assistance. When you consider the totality of this incident as it unfolded, I feel that our officers handled what was a chaotic situation the best way that they could. In a matter of seconds, officers saw the gun in Anthony's pocket and heard it fire. Officer Baldwin actually believed he had been shot when he felt the percussion from the discharge of the firearm. Then 2 more gunshots rang out in a small and compact bathroom. One of our officers was shot, and almost simultaneously, another individual emerges from out of one of the other stalls and grabbed Officer Clabo's shoulder. Our officers also had no idea where Anthony's gun was or if it still could be used. The most pressing matter was to ensure that the scene was rendered safe. Thankfully, our officers were able to detain the other individual who was in the bathroom without issue. This showed a tremendous amount of restraint, considering everything that had happened prior to that. Once the scene was rendered safe, medical assistance was requested. This all happened within a matter of seconds. Even though the actions of our officers were justified and within policy, we should never pass up on an opportunity to learn from these incidents and improve our operations. I want to take this opportunity to announce a new process that we are currently developing. I have charged Assistant Chief Fortner and our staff with establishing a use of force review board. This board's job will be to review in-custody deaths and all serious deadly uses of deadly force, such as the case that we're discussing today. The use of force review board will not be in place for disciplinary purposes. Instead, the board will conduct an in-depth after-action review of cases involving serious uses of force. Currently, most instances of use of force are reviewed by supervisors for potential policy violations. This board will not replace that process or the role of the Police Advisory Review Committee. Instead, it will only enhance our use of force review process. These reviews will focus on these incidents from a policy, tactical, and training standpoint. In essence, this board will serve as another quality control mechanism to improve our overall operations as a police department. The use of force review board is not operational just yet. We're in the final stages of the preparation and refining of the policy for the board, but we will have it up and running very soon. You will all receive copies of a news release with more information about the use of force review board soon after this press conference has concluded. At this time, I'll be happy to take any questions that you all have.
How will this new use of force committee be different from ones that already exist, that we already have in town?
So this use of force review board is going to look at these incidents from three perspectives: how we can improve policy, training, or tactics at either the individual level, the officer level, or as a department. So we will look at the totality of the circumstances to see if individual officers need to be trained, or if the whole department needs to be retrained, or if we have to augment policy or tactics based upon the review of this incident. We will look at this incident and all incidents from the beginning to the end to see if there's anything that we could do to improve. Now, I just want to be clear, this is not a disciplinary process. This sits outside of the disciplinary process to see what we can learn from these events and improve and grow as an organization.
So, do you believe that this policy is now in place because of this incident alone, or is it because you feel that maybe some things in the past had gone unchecked or not given the attention it deserved?
I believe that this is a best practice. So the mayor just reminded me we were actually streaming this live. So I'm going to repeat the question because sometimes it's hard for people streaming live to actually, hear the question. So the question was, would you mind repeating it again?
Sure thing. Do you believe that this policy is now in place because of this incident you guys were just investigating, or prior incidents that you feel didn't get the attention or penalty it deserved?
So the question was, why are we putting this in place now? Is it due to this incident, or is it something? Is there another reason? And the answer to that question is, I had full intentions of coming here as the new chief and putting this use of force review board in place, no matter what had occurred in the past. This is a best practice. We can never pass on an opportunity, or we should never pass on an opportunity to learn, grow, and improve as an organization. And that's what this is all about. It's about improving our policy, improving our training, improving our tactics.
Chief, what was the reprimand for the officer who violated the body camera?
So the question was about the reprimand for the body-worn camera policy. So Officer Wilson received a letter of reprimand. Now you got to remember, when this incident happened, KPD had body-worn cameras only for about 2 weeks. So body-worn cameras were very new. And what a letter of reprimand is, it's a formal reprimand that will be in the officer's disciplinary file permanently.
For the review board, have you determined yet how many positions will make up the board and what types of people will be on the board? Civilians, all internal?
Sure. So the question was about who will be on this use of force review board. So Assistant Chief Fortner is going to chair the use of force review board, and we're in the process of putting that policy together now for that board. Assistant Chief Fortner will chair it. We'll have several other members on the board as voting members. There'll be other members of the police department in a non-voting capacity. And just like with our disciplinary process now, we will allow the Police Advisory and Review Committee to sit in and observe that board as well.
Then I have the next question.
Chief, if you were on this review board, what would you take as learning lessons from this incident?
So the question was, if I was on the review board, what would I take as learning lessons? So I'm participating in numerous use of force review boards. I don't want to speculate on that. I think the beauty of this process is the whole board gets together and they really do a very deep dive into this case, not from a disciplinary not from a disciplinary process, not from here to see if the use of force was justified and in policy, which this use of force was clearly justified and clearly in policy, but what can we do better? What can we learn? What can we improve on? So I don't want to speculate on what that board would come out with yet. I really want to see what they're going to come out with when they do this deep dive into this case and other in-custody deaths and serious uses of force.
Scott.
You addressed the crisis negotiators, but once the officers were in the restroom, there's been a lot of questions about de-escalation techniques. First of all, does KPD have de-escalation training? Would it have been appropriate in the situation? And finally, will you be reviewing that to see if there are additional trainings or anything or policies that you can put in place?
Great. So Scott asked about de-escalation. Do we have de-escalation training? And should we have used it? Should we have used it in this incident? So officers absolutely receive de-escalation training. So officers receive that in the academy. Some of our officers have volunteered to go to the 40-hour CIT training, which is in advance of that. But all of our officers absolutely do receive CIT training. When you watch this video, this incident unfolded very quickly. You got to remember, when the officers walked into that bathroom, they didn't know that he was in that bathroom. They walked into the bathroom just like any one of us would walk into the bathroom, looking to see if somebody else they were looking for was in there. They didn't have their guns drawn. They weren't in a state of alarm. And in fact, with Officer Wilson, who walked in first, he walked in the bathroom and he sees Anthony in the stall to his right. And his first words to Anthony were, "Hey, Anthony, how are you doing, man?" So there was absolutely nothing that we did to escalate the situation. And at that moment, there was nothing that Anthony was doing to look like the situation was going to escalate. It escalated very, very quickly. The whole incident, the 3 shots fired, everything that happened took 11 seconds. So in this case, there was absolutely no time to deploy any de-escalation techniques. I absolutely feel that our officers handled this very chaotic situation in the best way they possibly could.
Liz, and then Sam.
Going back to the incident, something that I wanted to clarify, did the officers obtain a juvenile petition before they went to the school? And if so, what the charges were on that petition? And then the second part to that is, were they following the memorandum of agreement with the schools in the way they proceeded?
So the question was, did they obtain a juvenile petition, and were they following the memorandum of understanding between the school system? I don't know the answer about the juvenile petition. For the memorandum of understanding, a memorandum of understanding requires our school resource officers to receive 40 hours of school resource officer training. Officer Wilson had that training. All of our SROs have that training now, and they also, I believe, are required to operate in these schools in the least intrusive manner possible. I absolutely believe they did that in this case.
You mentioned when looking at use of force that it was pretty clear. What factors do you look into to determine that? And has anything really changed in investigation-wise since the body camera was released in April last year?
So I'll tell you, I'm going to go back to District Attorney General Sean Allen's press conference. And, when you watch that 2.5-hour press conference, I think she did a phenomenal job of really breaking down. And I'm going to repeat that question because I forgot to do it again. The question was about, the use of force being justified and anything changed. And when you watch District Attorney General Sean Allen's press conference, she did a phenomenal job of breaking down everything that the officers did. And she showed the video in real time, but she also slowed it down to, I think, 1/10 of a second, or 10 times frame. And it's important to remember, when we're looking at these, we have to put ourselves in the position of the police officers in the field. The officers don't have the ability to slow something down to 10 times slower than things happen in real life. And this incident involved very, very quickly. Officer Clabo feared for his safety. Officer Baldwin thought he was shot. He really thought he was shot. When you watch the video, he's like saying, "Check me, check me." He really, at that point, he believes he was hit. So, and you have 3 shots go off in a very, very tiny room. You only imagine how loud that was. It's loud on the video. Only imagine how loud that was in real life. And then as all that's going on, you have the other individual comes out from the stall and grabs Claybo on the shoulder. A lot of things happening at the same time. Based on those circumstances, and again, if you watch District Attorney General press conference, she does a phenomenal job. And I just got to say this, one of the best press conferences I have ever seen breaking down one of these officer-involved shootings. Excellent resource of information. And I absolutely believe that use of force was justified and within policy. And more importantly, I believed that these 4 officers handled this incident in the best way they could that day.
Is there anything else you would take from this as a learning experience? I know you didn't want to get out ahead of the review.
So I'm not going to get into what the use of force. The question was, what can we take away from this as a learning experience? And I'm just going to use this opportunity to say this. I am very hopeful that the community, our community, my community, as I now live here, is going to rally around our officers and rally around this community. This absolutely was a tragedy, but this is also a time for us to heal as a community. Austin East has to heal. Our community has to heal, and we have to move forward. As a police department, these officers have to move forward. Our community has to move forward. And what I would take away from this is the time for us to work extra hard to heal. That's one of the reasons, as your new chief, I have been going to 2 community meetings a day and getting out and seeing many people, some people over and over again. And it's important for us to establish those relationships and start that healing process.
Got time for a couple more, so we'll go through this again soon.
Sorry, I just wanted to push a little bit based on what you just said about, wanting the community to rally and to heal. Obviously, this has been a long time coming. And now it sounds like the use of the review board will look at this specific case. I mean, I think the community's going to want to know how much longer that could take. Like, I know you said the review board is not quite ready to launch. Can you give some kind of time frame?
Sure. So look, I just want to be clear. This is not the use of force review is not a public process. This is an internal after action review for us to take a look at policy, just like I sit down with my policy team. And the question was, I keep forgetting to repeat the question. The question was about the use of force review board. When is that going to take place? This is an internal review, an after action review. Just like I sit down with my policy team and go over policies and review policies. That's something that we do internally. Now, we will invite PARC, the Police Advisory and Review Committee, to sit in and watch that process and observe. But this is going to be an internal process. I don't have any plans on doing a public press conference again after this, saying that this is the findings of this case, because we're going to be doing these in all serious uses of force, just like we do other after action reviews.
Do you feel like the evidence was missed out on by not having Officer Wilson's camera on? I know there were already a couple angles from that bathroom. Do you feel like there was any evidence you wish you had?
Look, I don't. So, and remember, and so the question was, did we miss any evidence for not having Officer Wilson's camera on? So there were 4 officers in that room, and 3 of the 4 had their body-worn cameras on. So I think I don't want to say the uniqueness of this, but this was an incident where you had 3 different perspectives. I'm going to go back to District Attorney General Sharma Allen's press conference, 2.5-hour press conference on this. She actually shows all 3 perspectives from the 3 different officers that had their body-worn camera on. I think she did a great job of really walking the audience through all 3 perspectives of that. And to me, there was nothing that would have changed if Officer Wilson would have activated his camera, other than the fact that he wouldn't have received a letter of reprimand if he would have turned it on. And again, remember, 2 weeks. We only had body-worn cameras for 2 weeks back then. It was very, very new.
We got time for one more. If there's nothing else, though, we'll wrap it there.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just so you're all aware, the whole case file is available on our records. Okay. Anything else?